Why won't men seek help or help each other when they have been betrayed?
Welcome to the Therapy Brothers podcast.
I'm Brannon.
I'm Tyler.
We're brothers.
We're therapists.
And we know recovery.
Bring your stories, your questions, your successes with real recovery.
Hey, Tyler, you ready to have some hard conversations?
Let's do it.
Let the Therapy Brothers podcast begin.
Brannon, it's been an interesting one today. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Check out the t-shirt that I'm wearing.
That's like 3 years ago.
Well, yeah, but this one is our best one. That it's like comfortable. It's like soft.
I would say the material and the color on that one is our best shirt. And what Brandon's wearing, you guys who are just listening, he's wearing our old Rising Sun shirt. It's the shirt that we give out to people who come to the retreat. It's the most comfortable one and it's the best color, but it's not the best design.
No, but I love it. I mean, we showed up that one year and the colors were a little off, and it was like all these guys showing up and we're handing out periwinkle and pink shirts to them.
we thought we ordered like kind of orange and like dark like shirts, and instead they showed up and they were salmon and periwinkle. Well, welcome to the men's retreat.
Yeah. It was great, but
yeah, so it turned out great.
It was fine, but these shirts were better. I think
that this round coming up for Rising Sun, which is coming up actually fairly quickly. By the time this episode launches, it's probably about a month out. The t-shirts will be the best we've had since we've been putting on these retreats.
But you get a lot more than a t-shirt from Rising Sun. So
the t-shirt's an ancillary thing, right?
Yeah. But it's pretty awesome. But you get a lot more. So totally go to Rising Sun, risingson.org. We're down to it. So like this, you're getting down to your last chances to sign up. Also start making your plans to travel out to Bear Lake, Utah. And we would love to see you there.
If you're listening to this podcast, it's likely that you're trying to work an honest recovery. The reason that this is built is for you to tap into the heart of your recovery and not just the logistics of it all. So yeah, you should be there.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk to our guest, Eric. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Yeah, if you could give us just a little bit of background and help us understand what's going on with you, and then ask any questions you have.
Okay. My wife has actually been on the program, Claire. She was on episode 123, 156, and I think maybe another one, but I don't know. But briefly, well, I guess about 13 years ago, my life changed when I read my wife's journal and found out she was having an emotional affair for a few years, and kind of blew up my life. And then, we tried to move, run away. She just had another one, and eventually she had one that was more physical in nature, and that kind of led to some trouble at church and things. We were able to go and see our bishop. So we're Latter-day Saints, and got us into therapy, which just changed everything for me, and eventually for my wife. And it was so helpful, and I found you guys and some other help out there. But I know of people who have been betrayed, but none of them will accept help. Like, I reached out to some. They don't want to talk about it. They don't go to therapy. They just seem to be unwilling to, get help or be helped. One guy just turned to alcohol, drank for a few years, and another one, he stalks the affair partner, drives by the house, and another one, he went to, his wife had an affair, and she went back to see him again. And he didn't object or anything, just totally fine with it. So I mean, these men are they're not finding recovery. I don't think that their wives necessarily are, but like my wife, she's in good recovery, really doing well, and she's able to help people reach out to them, and women are willing to talk about it. But what is it with men that we just can't talk about it, won't get help? It's kind of my question.
It's a really good question, Eric. It's almost like what you just described is that you could round up somehow you found all of these other men who you at least know it's happened to, even though they won't get help. You could almost go start your own group that way.
Yeah.
I love your question, because in your question, there's this honest desire to want to connect and help and support and create community around recovery from betrayal for men. And can we clone you, Eric? And just like we need more men like you, because there is a void. There's a lack of support for men when it comes to healing from betrayal.
Yeah, I don't think you want to clone me. You don't know me well enough to realize that'd be a bad idea. But like my wife, we actually are both addiction recovery leaders in a group, and she also has a group just of women who have had trauma, or it's kind of open to anyone. And I'm kind of jealous. She gets to help people, and I'm just kind of like I have a story, and I feel like I can't tell it to help anyone. Partially just because can't find an audience that would be appropriate to share it with, I guess. And but
let's just talk about why. Like, why do you think that is? Why do you think that there aren't groups of men? There's plenty of betrayal trauma groups and betrayal trauma information and things out there for women who have been betrayed. Why for men is there not that resource?
Well, I think it probably comes down to ego and fear. It's maybe more embarrassing to be a betrayed husband than a wife, because it appears, or people believe it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Everything I've ever listened to, read, or it's always the male is the betrayer. You almost get sick of it.
I bet.
Yeah, but I understand why that is, but it's just kind of gets hard sometimes. So yeah, I think men are ashamed, embarrassed, and they don't want anyone to know, which it's a hard thing. Hardly anyone wants anyone to know about, these kind of situations, but.
Sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's interesting that you asked the question, and Brannon, I don't know about you for sure, but I think I know. But like at our practice, we don't have a betrayed spouses men's group. At any given time, I have probably a handful of men that are on my caseload that are in that spot, but there's never like enough men that have come forward that are saying, "Hey, I need this specific help," and that's why in the industry, Eric, that you're living in. You'll sense this. You've even sensed it probably on our own podcast that we even just sort of generally talk about things as the betrayed being the wife and the betrayer being the husband, and we almost sort of just like assume that in all of those conversations, right? And I think you're onto something. I think there's a little bit more to it that I want to add, but I want to ask you first, like when you said, I think it's ego. What do you mean by that, Eric?
I think ego, the way I understand ego is it's a defense mechanism in a way, because you're trying to not confront weakness in yourself, and so you put on a show or kind of just pretend you're not hurt. I don't know if that's accurate, but
yeah, I think you're right. And I think if we were to take it a step further with what you're saying, the ego is there to protect the more vulnerable parts of yourself. And you just said a couple words that I think go to the core of what makes it difficult, is that when you look at like the differences between, like, say, men and women with shame, men are the primary focus on men's shame is that word weakness. And somehow there's this idea that you can't show any weakness. And so what strikes at a man's ego or his sense of self in many relationships more than having his partner not want him in those ways. And so he's likely to go shut down even further because he doesn't want to demonstrate whatever that means about him in terms of his weakness or his inadequacies. And then we also have, I think, societally, it's changing over time, but most men feel like they're, in essence, I was having this conversation with my wife just the other day, men got the corner on sexuality, that men pursue sex and women just have to come along, which is totally false, but that's the way the world seems to operate. And women got the corner on emotions, and men need to just be stoic, steady, never show up with any other kinds of feelings, and anything that's difficult is a weakness, so you don't show it. And when you get both of those things put together in unhealthy ways, it causes some real struggles inside of relationships and on sense of self on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even make any sense because, for every man who has an affair, there's a woman involved, if it's in a heterosexual affair. So, I mean, the women they're having affairs. They don't get help very often. They don't want to admit it, and the men are even less likely to. But like with my wife, it took 10 years to figure out, oh, I have a sex addiction. It like wasn't even brought up or thought about or anything, until, and she told me one day, she's like, I think I have a sex addiction. And I'm like, well, I'm the only guy you've ever had sex with. What are you talking about? But it's totally different. It's romance novels. It's fantasy. It's emotional connection with other men is a huge problem. Emotional affairs are, in my experience, my wife's emotional affair was more difficult for me to handle, maybe because it was the longest lasting, and the way I learned about it was, pretty rough. But they're every bit as painful. I suppose just the more intense they are, the longer they last, and is a big factor in whether it was sexual or if it was emotional. But I think that's another thing that people in society sort of glance over. They don't really, more so they're understanding that now, but hey, we didn't have sex, so what's the big deal? You know, those kind of excuses were so easy. And like, you know, I went to my bishop and told him what was going on. He didn't even believe me. You know, he's just like, that's not happening. You know, the elders quorum president and you know, the primary president they're good people, and nothing happened or whatever, you know.
I have a question, actually for both of you guys. Maybe it's a discussion, and I hate to generalize, but I'm going to generalize some a little bit, because I know every situation's different. But overall, do men experience betrayal different than women? And the other question I have is the process of recovery and healing from betrayal different than it is for a woman? What do you guys think?
I've got my own thoughts, but go ahead, Eric.
Well, I mean, the experience must be different because the way they respond is so different, you know?
Right.
So there's got to be differences there. You know, in general, betrayal is betrayal, whether it's in a relationship that's, you know, married relationship, or maybe even, you know, someone betrays you at work. And there's general things you're going to experience and go through. You know, your world view collapses because someone you trusted and just thought that was impossible, you know, has betrayed you.
I think in general, betrayal is betrayal. But this point that you're making actually I think is important. But in terms of the form of betrayal of infidelity or even if it's an emotional affair, like breaking those bonds in a relationship, I wonder if a man experiences that different than a woman, in some ways.
Yeah, Brannon, I think your question, you asked both questions, and I think the answer to both is yes.
Yeah.
You know, there are definitely, when you look at the process of overcoming being betrayed, there's certain principles that we teach that I think apply to everybody who's working through the process of being betrayed. And there are some differences, and I think the differences in one way are connected to the reasons why there are affairs that take place too. So bear with me. I want to just explain this discussion. A discussion that I had with my wife yesterday. In church, we had the lesson on fidelity and on the law of chastity in church. Okay. So then we're driving over to this funeral that we're coming to right now. And it's a 2-hour drive. And she starts talking to me about, we were in different lessons. And she said, this is the way the lesson went. I was in with all the women and they were talking about, you know, how they need to protect themselves from their men, like acting out and doing and cheating on them and this and that and the other. And she said, I sat there, Tyler, and it just dawned on me that the law of chastity is for both men and women, but the conversation is different. And she said, I could see myself probably not being prone to a sexual affair, but I could definitely be more prone to some type of an emotional affair if I was getting my needs met through someone else other than you. And then it would kind of turn gray and then it would go a different way. And then there would be this infidelity that would be going on that would be just as important to address as if you went out and slept with somebody tomorrow. Right. And she said, but we never talk about that in the terms of fidelity or the law of chastity, even though principally it's the same thing. And what we do know is, if you look at it from a research perspective, and this is, of course, generally, but there's a significant enough research that shows that there is a difference why men and women cheat. And men are more prone to cheat for the sake of the excitement, the conquest, the actual physical sex part of it, whereas women are more prone to cheat if they're already hedging their bets and looking for a way out, if they're looking for a replacement of someone else who can be the support system, the new person.
Looking for connection, safety.
They're looking for that safety, deeper connection, whatever else. And sometimes they slip into that because they get the emotional connection, and then they get wrapped into all those other feelings, and then they have that affair. But if that's true, and again, it's not true across the board, but statistically speaking, that's true, then the experience of betrayal is going to also be a little bit different. Because if a woman is seeking the affair for those reasons, that's going to hit certain nerves inside of their partner, the same way that if a man pursues his sexual addiction or his affair or something else for the reasons he does, that's going to naturally be experienced a little bit differently by his wife. Yeah. And so it's still in both cases, it's going to strike at the core of their shame, their fear, their doubt, all of that stuff. But it's going to hit a man a little differently than it's likely to hit a woman, because the reasons why it's being pursued are slightly different.
Yes. That's a good way to put it, Tyler. Eric, what do you think about what he just said?
Yeah, I think the reasons are different. That they have the affair in a lot of cases. I was kind of thinking that, a man's kind of like stereotypically or whatever, we're the protector and we're supposed to protect our family. And so there's a sense of failure when your wife strays because you didn't keep her safe, or and there's this very different thing where women are just mad and hurt, but men are almost like
I failed.
Yeah. It's my fault. I think a lot of men sort of believe initially, where women, they don't ever think that. I mean, I don't know of one.
I think they think it a lot.
I do
in
too.
Different ways. I hear, and if I can differentiate this, Eric, because what I'm hearing you say is basically I wasn't man enough. I didn't provide the safety, the stability, the masculinity. And so she must have strayed because I wasn't strong enough. And for a woman, it's a little bit different. I wasn't woman enough, but it's I'm not desirable enough.
I wasn't desirable. I wasn't sexy.
I'm not wanted. I'm not sexy. I don't meet his needs in those ways. And we know, we know that neither are true. We know that your wife cheating on you didn't have much to do with you. And the same goes for the woman who's feeling like I wasn't desirable enough. It almost never has much to do with her. But the turn on self and the self-blame is very common with betrayal. But you can hear the difference there. So, and this kind of informs the recovery process. And by the way, side note, I do think we do a disservice by just acting as if betrayal goes one way. But a lot of times the work that needs to be done for a woman is for her to understand her beauty and her worth and who she is and how desired she is outside of that relationship. And to have boundaries and to set up her own safety regardless of the partner, right? Now that sounds really similar to what a man needs as well, right? But a man also needs to understand his masculinity, needs to understand his power and his strength. and trust himself and who he is, regardless of whether his wife has a sex addiction and is going to act out or not. And so there's a different process that needs to happen, but it's similar. There's similarities throughout.
What do you think of that, Eric?
Yeah, it makes sense. There's a kind of the same I don't know if it's emotions or the same feelings there, but they're interpreted very differently. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what's tricky is like this is where it goes back to Brannon's question of it's actually both of do they experience differently or separately? It's actually a little bit of both. And I think what women are actually generally pretty good at, better than men in general at when they're going through this, is what you said. They're willing to actually put themselves out there to seek support and help and connection with other women more often than men are. And
Tyler, would you ever start a business that specializes in treating betrayed men and addicted women?
It would be a hard thing to get off the ground. It's and what's interesting about that, Brannon, is it's needed.
It's so needed.
Yeah, like it is so needed.
But it would probably fail.
Well, the problem is like by the time, like in our practice, I on any given time, like I said, I have a handful of men who have been betrayed, but they don't really want to talk about it. They're there because they've also done the betraying, and that's the focus. And at the same time, I always have a handful of women who are also struggling with their own compulsive sexual behaviors or having had affairs or other things. But that doesn't get talked about until after they've developed a massive amount of trust in the process and the system. And so they'll be coming to their betrayal trauma group for like a year. And then they'll like pull me aside after a group one day and be like, hey, like, I'm really struggling with my boundaries because I feel like a hypocrite. And I'm like, well, why? And they're like, well, because I've had this same problem for the last 10 years, but I haven't told anyone yet.
I've worked with couples before, like over a year, where we're, focusing on his sex addiction and his acting out, his pornography use, masturbation. And then over a year in, she'll say something like, well, yeah, I mean, and it's this very uncomfortable, awkward conversation. And it's, well, I use it maybe as much or more than he does. I masturbate as much as him. But the problem in the relationship that we've been focused on is his acting out. His acting out becomes the bull in the china closet. But I also think it's the easy place to focus, because acknowledgement of of the woman acting out is more shameful and more difficult to talk about. So then we're not addressing how he's feeling betrayed too. We're just addressing that he's struggling with an addiction.
Right. And then you're also not addressing her needs for recovery in terms of being accountable and open and honest and transparent and all of that other stuff. And so she can never actually get traction on her own recovery because she always feels like a hypocrite. She can't set boundaries. She can't but then it's always under the surface and it's like almost not to be talked about. And I got to tell you, like in both of my groups, my women's groups right now, there are a couple of women who have finally had the courage to kind of say, I'm both. I've been betrayed and I've done the betraying. Yes. And oh my gosh, it adds such richness to the groups. It adds so much power and it gives them the platform to kind of work on both at the same time.
But it's also uncomfortable because I've been in those groups too, where there are some women kind of like, ew, like I'm in a group with a betrayer. Like I kind of hate betrayers right now.
Yeah.
Like, so it creates a tough dynamic.
It's a tough dynamic, but it's a valuable dynamic if you have the culture that can hold it. Because what ends up happening is if I'm sitting in my women's group and this woman comes in and she says, man, I'm really struggling and this is what happened for me this week. The other women in the group kind of cringe, but they also go, I love that lady.
They have compassion.
I love her and I can understand her and I get her because she also gets me because she's been betrayed too. But and then they go and they're like, well, how could I empathize with her
and see her humanity?
Yeah, but not my husband's. And in some ways it's a real blessing if the group culture can hold it.
Yeah.
And the same is true for men. And what's interesting, Eric, and this is what I think you have at your fingertips right now, is because it's more rare for a man to talk about his process of having been betrayed. If you go into the right places that can hold the story, your story is a gift. Your story will actually invite others who might be feeling the same things to go, oh, maybe I could share my part of that story, or maybe I could do this, or maybe I could do that. And I mean, even just coming on the show today is probably a massive step in the right direction for you personally, Eric, and going, hey, I'm going to help facilitate some change here for some good in this world.
Yeah, sometimes you feel like, you have a gift no one will open, but no one will.
Yeah, that's frustrating.
No one will unwrap it,
Yeah. A gift nobody will unwrap. And you can see why. Like it's not like if you're worried it's going to be like a Jack in the Box that like pops out, you're like, oh geez, like I didn't want to open that. Like this is heavy and hard. This is brutal, so it makes sense, but you're right, it is the gift. And I want to come over to this, to what you said right at the beginning of our episode today, is that you somehow you stumbled around in the dark for a while, and then you got the right kind of help, and you said it was completely invaluable. And I want to know, if you can, put words to the actual things you got out of getting the help you did from your therapist or your groups or whatever else you did. Like, what was so valuable about all of that for you?
To think about that for a second. In my case, I think I I got away from it's my fault, I'm not man enough. I realized that real masculinity is vulnerability, being strong enough to say the truth, and so I think the real masculinity has come out in me. That's, I think, one of the most important things that I've gained, and also I have found an online group. Due to scheduling and stuff, I can't attend it right now. But I think one of the things for me that's so valuable is when there are other men who have been through this, and they know how to assert their masculinity. They know how to say, no, this isn't okay. As women want to be in denial, or it helped me to be able to have some boundaries. They give you confidence to reinforce, confidence, so that you can understand, yeah, this isn't okay. It's not okay for her to continue a relationship where there's, saying, oh, I can make it just friends now, or, so that's kind of like, I see the people I know, and they're just floundering, and it's like, I get mad at them, and then I think, well, but I was the same way, when I was in the dark floundering. I didn't know how to stand up for myself and have boundaries, but it's those men I admire, because they're not just drinking, and they're not just mad and complaining. At first I found online groups, and I realized all they were is a hate women group.
Mm-hmm.
Where you could go in there and say how women are horrible, and I'm like, well, this isn't helpful at all. So I think there's just having a community that understands is so helpful, but so hard to find for us. And, one thing is like, I was thinking about is because women express their sexuality very differently, and often their affairs are not sexual, but emotional, and that it makes it so that they can deny them so much easier. Once you have sex, it's like, well, there's not really any way to justify that, or gaslight anymore. But with women, they're deeply connected to these guys, and they're having an affair, but even friends, and if you have someone you talk to, they're kind of like, well, I don't know if it's I guess that's kind of a tangent, but
yeah. So we can go on to that for just a second too, but just to capture what you just said, you basically said that part of what helped you was having things normalize your experience and realizing, especially that you weren't alone, but then also having and finding a few men who understood what you were going through, but were also walking a path that was stepping towards recovery instead of just complaining and staying the victim. And when you did that, it helped provide some scaffolding for you to start stepping into setting boundaries and changing perspectives. That's what the biggest value has been for you since you started reaching out for help.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And I think this isn't just, we're talking men and women here today, but what you said about the gaslighting, I think it is difficult because there's a lot of gray area between what's a friendship and a friendly and a cordial relationship versus an emotional affair. And it's easy when there's a physical action that goes with it to say that's an affair, sexual action, something took place, that's an affair. But what you were saying is there is such a thing as an emotional affair. And sometimes it's harder to put your fingers on because it doesn't have that like distinct action that says, yep, that's an act of infidelity. And that's why it takes a lot of work for couples to really be honest with themselves and each other about like, what are the boundaries inside of the relationships that we have outside of our relationship together? And I think a lot of people, they end up backdooring their ways into either emotional or then eventually physical affairs in very innocent ways that they intended never to have happened. But it's kind of like slow plays itself because they don't have spelled out healthy boundaries for how to handle their relationships in the first place.
I just want to add, emotional affairs are very, like Eric, you were saying, ripe with denial. Like, oh, what? I'm not having an affair. Like, I could tell you some stories where you hear these stories and it's like, yeah, that's crossing lines. Yeah, that's an affair. But they would come back with, why? Like, I was just doing this. I was just doing that. It's not that big a deal. But that's a whole other discussion. The other thing I wanted to mention is I think we need to be careful about, and this goes both ways. Men love to connect emotionally. Women love sex. Both those things are true. Women have sex when they have affairs. Men have emotional connection when they have affairs as well. And so I think we don't want to generalize too much because then it kind of feeds the very issue that we've been talking about today. Yes, it's true. The sexuality of a woman is much different than a man. And I think because, a man is much more results oriented and like, let's get her done. It seems like they're the ones just about sex. The reality is that we are built differently, but affairs go both ways. And I do think it's extremely unfair. And Eric, I feel like I haven't answered your question because I don't have answers for you. It's extremely unfair that there aren't the resources for the other side. And you have been very, like you're different than most. You're willing to pursue and find and figure it out. And it sounds like you have found a lot of good things, and you're also finding that there's a lack there in resources.
Which again is, the way that we view recovery is that some of your life callings are going to come through some of the darkest places. And
yeah,
maybe there's something calling to you there, Eric, in terms of not just coming on this show one time, but reaching out to the guy who's been drinking and the guy who's like, there's a whole other side of this that I see guys, they know their wife's having an affair emotionally or physically, and they'll almost like go be complicit in it. Like I had a guy travel halfway across the country to go visit her wife's old childhood friend for 3 days, and it's like, no, that's not what you guys were doing. It's like, have some boundaries. That wasn't okay. And so, but you could be the guy that could pull a few of those guys together and go to your buddy who's drinking himself to death and say, hey, there's a better way. And go to the guy who is like complicit in perpetuating and enabling that continued behavior and say, dude, like, you don't have to do that. Like, your wife's actually maybe testing the boundaries to see if you're finally going to step up and fight for her a little bit. And that might be part of what the calling is. I don't know, Eric. That's between you and your higher power.
Side note, Tyler and I would love to talk to more women struggling with sex addiction, and we would love to talk to more men who have been betrayed. We would love that. Please sign up. Come talk to us. On our show, if you listen, we fall into that very thing where it's like 90% one way. And it does need to be talked about more and discussed more.
Eric, I don't know if we've even gotten to any answers or help for you today, but you've stoked up a really nice conversation for a lot of us to think about. We're getting kind of close on time. Any other thoughts? Last questions? Anything on your mind right now, Eric?
I guess, you could start that business where you just switched to the men who were betrayed and the women who weren't, and then go find a soup line. But yeah. I don't know. It's a problem that I think in time will be solved as society does change a little bit and acknowledge, like, exactly what you were saying, Brendan, about we're all sexual beings. We all need emotional connection, and we can all be betrayed. These are just realities that we seem to just have a hard time accepting.
Yep. I'm just theorizing here, and I know we're wrapping this up, but you talk about your buddy who's drinking and the other one who's stalking the affair partner, and masculinity is more results oriented. It's more like, oh shoot, this thing happened, like I need to go figure that out. I need to go take care of it. I'm gonna go beat up that dude. I'm gonna go like whatever, right? In femininity, it's more about feeling and process. So it's more about stepping in and feeling what's going on. And so you can see how therapy and therapy groups lend more toward the feminine when it comes to what they're going to do about it. They're going to turn and they're going to say, okay, I need to deal with what's going on here, and we need to fix this relationship for safety. Guys are like, you know what? I'm gonna numb that out with some alcohol. You know what? Like, I'm going to go like beat that dude up. Like,
the only reason I would need other dudes is if I was getting a posse together.
Yeah. So we could like hang out and like whatever.
Go beat up the dude.
Yeah.
Right.
So just another theory, which sucks, because what that leads to is not resources, not enough men who are ready to process and deal with the feelings behind it, to go through the grief, and to really find recovery.
I would just add one more thing here to that, Brannon, is that you're right. There is a vacuum of resources on both sides when you flip the roles.
Yeah.
I do think there are people out there that are trying to make that change. A guy like Eric, or my sister-in-law Chelsea. She started her own women's group for people who struggle with compulsive sexual addiction. There are people trying to do that, and I think we need to keep helping to foster planting those roots a little bit. The one of the blessings that you have, and that Eric, I think you've stumbled into this, is that it might not be laser focused right on exactly what you've needed, but the principles of recovery largely still apply.
Yes.
So the things that you've been learning in therapy, even though they're often talked about in reverse, many of those principles still apply, and you can get into wholehearted living and accountability and reclaiming your life and taking good care of yourself and setting healthy boundaries and living in the moment, and all of that stuff still applies, and you will gain traction, even though it might not be hit straight on with like my betrayed men's group, right? No. Even that, you'd probably have to change the name of that group just to get guys to show up.
Right.
You'd have to turn it into like the warrior group or something,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, the wounded warrior or whatever, So anyway, thank you, Eric, for your willingness to come on. Thank you for your willingness to talk about this topic, because it doesn't get talked about enough. And admittedly, Brannon and I don't really talk about it as much because we're so wrapped up in what comes through our door every single day. And it's more often the other way around. So love to hear some feedback from some of our other listeners on what this has stirred in you and your own thoughts and feelings about it. Best way to do that is to come on the show yourself, therapybros.com, or to go and review the podcast on any of the platforms that you're listening on, and throw a shout out for Eric when you do so. So thank you for being here with us, you guys. And until next time, keep on keeping on.